Welcome, guys, to the latest episode of Bhartiya Janata podcast. Glad to have Aditya back today. And along with Aditya, we have another guest today, and that is the famous News Laundry Indian writer, journalist, Meghnad, no last name.
Constitutional expert.
Constitutional expert, Meghnad, with no last name. Meghnad, before I reach to you, let me just quickly get up to speed with Aditya because Aditya has recently came back from Kailasa. How
Okay.
was your trip? How was your trip, Aditya?
A beautiful place and with a lot of wisdom. I feel enriched.
वहां पे सीए लगवा रहे हो कि नहीं?
हाँ, वहाँ पे तो पहले से सीए लगवा के ही सब कुछ शुरू होता है। नया कंट्री है ना,
अच्छा,
सिटीजनशिप शुरू में वैसे ही शुरू होता है। So everybody is on the roll now.
they are
No
rooted in
NRC,
tea.
no NRC later.
Oh, is
So
this the
make
Nityanand ka Kailasa?
हाँ,
Yeah,
that's the running gag in our
Oh,
thing
damn.
where
Oh.
that's the running gag that Aditya is basically the Amit Shah of Kailasa.
I was for some reason imagining the Kailasa mountain. I'm like, oh, is he a mountaineer or something? I was like,
Hmm.
what?
नहीं नहीं नहीं. We are, and I also want because from childhood my parents wanted me to be an IAS officer. I was not smart enough to be one.
तो
So
Acha.
कैलासा
maybe
में we can all Kailasa is like the Kidzania of the Hindu world.
It's like
जिसको जो
the
बनना है
new
वो बन
amusement park for the
पर
Hindus, no? Like
yeah.
in Nagpur, so I grew up in Nagpur, and there used to be
uh,
like this amusement park, like some 20 kilometers away. It was called Fun and Food Village. So we used to go there, like for amusing ourselves. So Kailasha is
We have
basically that.
we had Tikujini Wadi in Thane.
Okay.
It's basically the same.
also
Yeah.
for me, I grew up in Jabalpur. So Nagpur
Huh.
for me is like London. For
Oh wow.
every
Okay.
person in Jabalpur, Nagpur is like their London. We aspire to go to Nagpur to do anything. So, Meghnad, let's start with a bit of your background.
Right.
And I mean, we all know who you are, but it'd still help us to, start over. And
Hmm.
also, I'd like you to go back in time, even before Mr. Satpathy,
Hmm.
and trace some of the points how you found your political identity or
Like
whatever your political
as
beginnings.
Amit Verma says, my intellectual journey. Can you
Yes, your
can you
intellect.
define your intellectual journey? I really like that question. Yeah,
Yeah.
I get
It's an
it.
open-ended good question, right?
Yeah,
It's
yeah,
like, yeah.
absolutely. Basically, you just have to chill
Yes.
background bata basically.
Uh,
So okay, so I was born in Nagpur and in 1989, and I've just grown up there, and I tried to do CA. I cleared two exams and then I couldn't do it anymore because I sucked at it. Then I tried my hand at journalism when I joined Times of India Nagpur, and I've started with their entertainment beat where I was
oh,
covering page three parties. That was
क्योंकि
fun.
नागपुर
Free
में तो
food.
पेस्ट्री पार्टीज
अरे
का
dude, you have no idea. मैंने गडकरी के लड़के की शादी कवर की है. Okay,
I
so
was
ओ
going to ask you exactly that. कि नागपुर का पेस्ट्री पार्टी में गडकरी इन्वॉल्व है.
yeah. I covered that. I mean, there were many page three parties that I went to, but then I was shifted to the crime department, basically the crime beat, and then I covered a bunch of gruesome murders, and then I was shifted to education and law and etc. But then, meanwhile, I also applied for this fellowship called LAMP, Legislative Assistance to Members of Parliament.
अच्छा
It's run by PRS Legislative in Delhi. And it's basically a fellowship where they take like 50 people from all across India, young people, and then they put them with random MPs and they have to work with them for a year as legislative aides. So I did that. So that's why I came to Delhi. And since then, that was in 2011. And since then, I have been working with MPs till I think 2018. So from 2011 to 2018, so that's 7 years.
hmm
So I've worked with five MPs, actually six, but
could
yeah,
you name
six
them if you
MPs.
I don't know
Yeah,
are you
yeah. So I worked with this MP from Sikkim called PD Rai. I was in Sikkim for 1.5 years. Then I worked with Derek O'Brien for a
nice
year. Then I worked with Ranjit Singh Mohite Patil, this guy from Maharashtra. Then I worked with KD Singh, who was from Haryana. Then I worked with Tathagat Satpathy, who was
Yeah.
from, of course, Orissa. So yeah, I mean, like I've worked with a bunch of them, and then after a point, I was also helping other MPs from BJD and helping them write speeches, do research, etc. So yeah, so my that's basically my career, if you want to call it that. And then I quit in 2017, around 2007, 2017, was it 2017? Yes, yes. Around 2017, I quit, and then I basically started writing full time for News Laundry and other publications. Then I did Constitution season 1, then I wrote a book, and then I did Constitution season 2, and now here I am. So, yeah,
So,
highlights.
uh, so I guess my question will be, before you applied for LAMP,
Hmm.
because anybody who applies for something like a LAMP
Hmm.
already has certain clear-cut political ideas and kind of knows how to define themselves
Right.
within the whole spectrum of Indian politics. So
Hmm.
where did you stand, and how much were you ready to compromise vis-a-vis? Because I'm guessing the MPs were a random match, I guess, right?
Yeah, okay, so that was really weird because the thing is that I was in like such a situation in my life where I was desperate to do anything worthwhile. Because I was doing CA, did not work out. Journalism, basically nobody paid any attention to much journalism in Nagpur, and I grew up in a very conservative family. They were like, my dad is a CA, my family is full of architects and engineers, so they wanted me to like go the traditional way and make a career in something like that,
Mm-hmm.
but I was not interested. But then the tragic part is that nobody was around to also tell me what else to do, right? Like arts, if you did like something like arts in Nagpur, it was seen like, oh, such a low grade sort of education you're getting. So
Across the board, upper caste Hindu families across the board.
yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, in that situation, I was just looking to escape from Nagpur, right? And then I just
Hmm.
applied for this fellowship who one of my cousins from IIT told me about. And I just applied because I was like, what's the harm? I'll just try it out. And then I got in. I have no idea how, but I did. And it's really funny because the first day I remember we had a month long training in LAMP, right?
Hmm.
And I went there, plopped myself down, and the first person who comes to talk to us is Shashi Tharoor. And I was like starstruck. I mean, like, oh
Hmm.
my fucking god, who, yeah,
Hmm.
And then he asks everyone, who here wants to go into politics, right? And I was sitting in the
Hmm.
front, and I remember raising my hand because I
Hmm.
thought, hey, everybody here will want to go into politics, right? Because that's what this is
Yeah.
all about. And I looked behind, and I was the only person raising my hand, right? And I
Okay.
was stunned because clearly what I was doing was stupid. Because Shashi was also laughing, and he was like, "Oh no, brave boy," etc. I'm like, okay, that doesn't help at all. But then that is the day I realized that all the people with me who had come, as you said, had clearly defined political ideologies or even like background education in how parliament works or how even everything else works, like how bills are passed, in basic education, right? In what we were doing, I had none. Like, I literally
Interesting.
did not pay attention in civics at all, right? And I still wonder why I was taken in that fellowship. Maybe something I said in the interview really struck them, or whatever. But I got in, and the thing is that the first thing I did after that was read civics. Like, I went back to my 8th grade, 9th grade civics lessons, and I read all of it again. Because honestly speaking, like, I used to follow current affairs, I used to read about it, but I've never thought about it from a point of an ideology or what I support or which party I support, which ideology I support. I just didn't know. And then after that, it basically developed, and it's still developing actually.
That's a great point that you bring, because this is, you completely are breaking my presumption. I thought
Yeah.
that you already had a well-defined political outlook at that point. But this brings
Honestly,
me
I
to
still
Mhm.
don't. That's the whole point. I'm still developing it.
Uh, but this brings me to a a question that I really wanted to ask you, and this question has born itself very recently. So recently,
Right.
something happened on Twitter,
Hmm.
which all of us live and die in.
Hmm.
Um, a very prominent Congress social media guy tweeted
Hmm.
about a 10-year-old tweet by
Akash Banerjee.
Akash Banerjee about how Akash Banerjee
Yeah,
really
yeah.
liked you.
Saket, what's his
Yeah,
name?
yeah, yeah. Saket Gokhale,
Saket
right?
Gokhale. Yeah,
So
yeah, I remember.
so basically, basically the question that I want to ask you is this:
Hmm.
people develop their political outlook over a period of time. People
Hmm.
change their political outlook over a period of time, and people
Yes.
move from one area to the other area over a period of time. And if we will hold people accountable for what they said 10 years ago and
Hmm.
call them things like fascist enablers,
Right.
how do you think, like, so basically your thoughts on this whole cancel culture
And
that is happening?
Yeah.
by extension, does it force people to play into that stereotype just because they have said something?
Hmm.
Does it push them to a corner, and does it allow them to change their ideologies even if they realize it is wrong?
Yeah, yeah. So this has happened to me multiple times now. Basically, the thing is that way back in 2000, so I got on Twitter in 2009, right?
Hmm.
2009, like
Yeah,
the
same.
initial days of Twitter when nobody knew what it was.
Yeah,
And it was fun, right? If you guys were there, you would
yeah,
remember, like everybody used to say whatever the fuck they wanted, like
yeah.
without, because obviously there was no pressure. Like who was listening to you anyway? They were like, I had like what, 70 followers, 80 followers, then went to 300 or whatever. Nobody was listening, right? And you would participate in trends and hashtags, and people on Twitter, where people also you knew physically, like from Nagpur or from
Yeah,
Delhi, like they were there, and you would chat with them. That was what Twitter was.
yeah.
Back then, even I have said some extremely random, very problematic, and very bizarre things. Because again, 2009 10 was when I was like, what, 18 years old? 17, 18 years old. And back then, I used to curse. I remember in 2011, when the 2011-12, when the Anna Hazare movement was happening.
Yeah.
Um, I remember cursing Rahul Gandhi and Sonia Gandhi on a daily basis, right? Like I would literally wake up in the morning, I would be like, "Fuck Sonia Gandhi, fuck Rahul Gandhi, fuck Sonia Gandhi, fuck Rahul." That was all I tweeted for straight up 30 days. I was just saying, "Fuck Sonia Gandhi and fuck Rahul Gandhi." That is all I did, right? And then
Yeah.
later, some people pulled it out. Obviously, like I didn't know back then that what will happen in the future, like whatever 8 7 8 years later. Some people pulled it out. Obviously, they pulled it out, and then they were like, "Oh my God, look at this guy! Look at this guy! He was always sympathizing with the BJP. That is exactly what was happening. He's like a plant or some shit, whatever." And then like I did another thing, which was I wrote an article for BuzzFeed where
Hmm.
what I just told you, my whole journey from that point till that point, about how um, it happened. I had written about it, about how my aspirations, how political aspirations are built, basically,
Yeah.
or how I saw it. There, I admitted to voting for Gadkari. Like
Hmm.
because I was in Nagpur and I just saw
This
that
is
he was one
2009
of
or
the
2014?
2014. Yes,
Okay. Okay, that tweet
and
was also brought up basically, right? In this whole,
yeah, yeah, they keep
yeah,
bringing this up. They keep
yeah.
bringing this up, and I have admitted it basically. And the weird part is that it was like, I mean, back then I thought that I was making a legitimate point, right?
Hmm.
Back then, I again, as I said, my sensibilities are still developing as well.
Hmm.
Back then, I was steeped in this whole system where I was working with MPs, and I saw
Hmm.
that if you chose the right candidate, if you saw their work in Parliament, if you saw what they have done in the past, then that should be just the thing enough, that should be the only criteria for your vote. That is what I used to think back then. right? But then later, as I went through it, I also realized that no, MPs don't really matter. The party does. The party is the one that is calling the shots ultimately. The MPs as an individual doesn't matter. So my one vote to someone like Gadkari actually enabled the BJP, right? So I know that now, right? And that's why I didn't vote for them again, right? I didn't vote for, like, I voted for a non-BJP party.
Hmm.
But that's my thing. You evolve, you deal
Exactly.
with the political structure, you evolve. So I just do not understand why people are just so trigger happy these days, right? I mean, that whole Akash
Hmm.
Banerjee thing was absolutely unnecessary. I came to his defense also. And then
Yeah.
obviously, right after that, they pulled up my tweets as well and started posting them. So as they, yeah, fuck it. I just don't want to get into this. I'm like, not worth
This is
my time.
almost this is almost like the liberal equivalent of 1984 में तुम कहाँ थे type.
Yeah, absolutely it is. And this cancel culture that you mention is
Yeah.
so toxic, and it makes me so angry that and it exists everywhere, and it's really problematic actually. It disallows you from having a dialogue with people. It disallows you from having a
Yeah.
view and opinion that is different from people. It's very dangerous.
And this also is kind of related to some other things that I often view.
Right.
So one thing that I am seeing is, or maybe this is just in my head, but at least this is something that I notice all the time, is that every time it seems like if you want to criticize BJP, to
Hmm.
come across as objective, you have to bring out something that Congress did and have to criticize them, and only
Right.
then you go on and criticize BJP for that. So
Hmm.
as someone who's trying to be as objective as they can be,
Hmm. Hmm.
how difficult it has been for you to kind of walk this path where anything that you are saying that is critical of the BJP is seen as a
Hmm.
ye to liptad hai, and
Hmm.
and and it's and basically to come across as objective, sometimes people have to say certain things that they don't even entirely mean. Like, for example,
Hmm.
I don't really think personally, I don't think
Hmm.
Rahul Gandhi is stupid, but I
Hmm.
see people say that all the time, even though I know that they don't believe it, just because they
Hmm.
want to come across as objective. Has this been a difficult thing?
So my thing has been clear right since the beginning, and I think it's just a question of whether I'm able to translate it properly, right? So to my followers or to people who read my stuff or consume my content. Um, Sorry, my view has been clear. Whoever is in power, I don't give a shit about what party you're from, you're going to behave the same way, right? And I have seen it since 2011. Congress did a few things. BJP just continued them. They just packaged it better and implemented it better, and you see that all across, because I have seen bureaucracy up close, right? I have seen structures of government up close. So parties will change, but the bureaucracy and the structures of government essentially remain the same, right? The mentality of the people running the government essentially remains the same. So the people who are using that power to execute policies and laws and do things in the society, they remain the same. So
Yeah.
essentially, it's just a question of who is in power and questioning them, right? And I have always been clear about that. Like when Congress was in power, I was questioning them. When Aam Aadmi Party is in power here, I'm questioning them in Delhi. When
Hmm.
BJP is in power in the center, I'm questioning them, right? So that is essentially it. And this whole thing about oh, you have to be careful and you have to equally criticize the Congress as well as BJP.
Yeah.
I think that's absolutely false equivalence, and we shouldn't fall for it, because I'll give you a simple example.
Hmm.
Recently, you must have read those series of stories that we published on News Laundry on the electoral bonds, right? Nitin
Yeah. Yeah.
Sethi did a giant
Yeah.
investigation, right?
Yeah.
Um, so I was so essentially his stories went like a little crazy, and Congress did a press conference, right? So there, one of our reporters went there, and he asked me, because I was studying the issue, so he asked me, what sort of questions should I ask? So I said I advised him, you should ask the Congress to reveal their names. They also got money, so they should also reveal the names. And if they are opposed to this scheme, why are they, not revealing it, or why are they even taking any electoral bonds? That was
Hmm.
my logic,
Yeah.
right? So he went and asked that question, and Rajiv Gowda was there, and Rajiv Gowda
Yeah.
explained that yeah, we have taken electoral bonds, but obviously we're not going to reveal the names. Let the ruling party reveal the names first, which is BJP.
Hmm.
So I found that a little strange, and Ayush did a story on it as well. But then later, when I spoke to a few people, they said that this is a very wrong approach, for a simple reason that there is a power imbalance here, right? Because BJP, all said and done, gets maximum amount of money from electoral bonds. So if Congress refuses to take even little whatever they are getting, they're immediately out of the game, right? So instead of asking what who are your donors, etc., etc.,
Hmm.
you should be asking all political parties to sort of reveal the names together, right? Instead of
Yeah.
just asking the Congress to do it or the BJP to do it or whatever it is. And I mean, I see sense in that. There is a power imbalance, definitely. So I don't think this whole thing about monkey balancing and asking the questions to Congress also makes any sense, because they're not in power. They're actually quite irrelevant right now.
Yeah. Yeah.
But is this monkey balancing also partly because of the stigma that is associated with the Congress from the India Against Corruption days? People
Hmm.
think that outrightly saying something against the BJP and that false equivalence, that then you stand for corruption more than anything else. Because at some level, when I'm questioning the morally corrupt nature of some policies today,
Hmm.
uh, monkey balancing essentially means that you are diluting the pure nature of the evil that is the intention behind certain policies
Yeah.
of the day, right?
Yeah.
So, do people just do that so that they don't get this pushback from the other side, calling them corrupt or standing for the
I
notion of,
mean, this is like what centrism looks like, I guess. I mean, that is
yeah,
what people
yeah,
consider is centrism right now, right? Like, I
Hmm.
mean,
Hmm.
there are enough people right now who basically, whenever a BJP is being criticized, they will also like add their voice, but then immediately they would say, "Huh, but in 1967, Congress did this particular thing, and it is so relevant right now that BJP is also doing the same thing." And that happens, that the people I'm talking about, right?
Uh,
um I mean, there are people who out and out sort of try to do this monkey balance. And I'm just trying to say that, to each their own. I mean, they feel like there is value in digging up the past and putting it in your face,
hmm.
for some contrarian sort of arguments. But my thing is, again, by doing that, you're sort of equating two two parties which just are not in the same level right now, right?
Yeah.
I to a large extent, I feel like it's important to sort of give a historical perspective of what has happened in the past, comparing it with the present. But then at the same time, if you're going to put it up as criticism of both sides at the same time, I do not agree with that. Right? Like, you criticize those in power right now, you equate them with those who were in power in the past, sure, do that. But then to say that, oh, both of them are the same, and therefore you need to do this monkey balancing all the time, that whenever you're criticizing the BJP, you also have to bring up what the Congress has done, that I think I don't agree with.
and also very often there seems to be this monkey balancing and even equating ineptitude on one side with purely vile policies on the other side. Very
Yeah.
often, this is also something I see. So,
And
But
but
yeah,
to
go on.
use it as justification is also
yeah,
one aspect of it, right?
one
Like,
aspect. Yeah,
because BJP is doing it, oh, but Congress ne bhi to kiya tha. But that's the
yeah,
whole
tha.
point, right? That is why we
Hmm,
fucking kicked them out in
hmm,
2014. That is why they got so less votes in 2019 again. So
hmm.
this whole thing about, oh, but unhone bhi kiya tha. But then the immediate question that should come from the people who are us, like, who are being asked this question is that, but are you saying that you also want to do the same things? Like, do you want to say that BJP is the same as the Congress and they just want to do the same thing as the Congress? Are you saying that? Like, I mean, we don't hear this often enough, right? When these comparisons happen, the first thing to shut people up is that, so you are essentially saying you are the Congress.
It's
Yeah.
also like a tacit admission of being wrong, right? By
Exactly.
saying that someone else was wrong. Yeah.
Right. Exactly.
So over the last few years, one thing that has become clearer for me is that a lot of people um, talked about corruption during the Congress time,
Hmm.
not because they cared about corruption, but because they cared about not having Congress have the power.
Yeah.
And when it comes to the current government, they don't care about any idea of corruptions perceived or real. What
Hmm.
they care about is for this government to be in the power, and that being in the power is the be all and end all of it.
Hmm. Hmm.
So
Hmm.
so keeping in line with the objectivity question that I just asked you, let us narrow it, or I don't know, put it in a more smaller scale. So
Hmm.
coming from Nagpur, coming from
Hmm.
a Maharashtrian family, I
Hmm.
am sure you have plenty of BJP supporters in the family, right?
Oh yeah, definitely. Like
So
proper Sanghis.
yeah, so my question is, when it comes to talking to them,
Hmm.
um, has your objectivity or has your leaning ever been questioned, and how you have dealt with that, because that's happening at a more personal level, right?
Yeah, yeah. So that has happened actually. So it is very strange how this whole thing has happened, because the first time I came to Delhi, everything was quite chill. Everybody was against
Mhm.
the Congress. Everybody was like, oh, with the anti-corruption movement. So everybody was super proud when I sent them like pictures from protests, and
Mhm.
when I told them, oh, this is happening and this is what we did in parliament, so everybody was like, oh my god, you're doing such great work, right? Then after 2014, when I kept doing the same thing, which is basically working in parliament and questioning the government, because I continued working with opposition MPs then as well,
Yeah.
um, suddenly something changed when they were like, oh, you're against the country or whatever, and that continues. It just grown, right? This whole narrative.
Yeah.
So now, earlier I used to still argue with them. I used to like correct them whenever they would spread misinformation. I would share alt news links or do whatever. But then there was a point where my own relatives started giving me like sort of death threats, like where they were like, देख लेंगे तेरे को, तू आ जा बस वापस घर पे, like you're the black sheep of the family or whatever the fuck. And it's very terrifying when your own family starts doing that to you. And then I was just like, I'm just going off. So I exited all groups. I just shut up. I was like, I will not interact with these people anymore. But then, now what I realize is that I've been added back to the groups to gloat more than anything else after
Mhm.
2019. That, oh, lol, you were schooling us, but look what happened. Modi came back with more power. So now
Mhm.
it's a gloating purpose, right?
Huh.
Now I realize I don't send them like links to whatever or whatever. I have gone super Sanghi with them now, right?
Mhm.
I have basically started going to extremes that even they can't imagine, where I'm talking to them and saying कि मोदी ने पाकिस्तान को क्यों नहीं हमला हमला किया अभी तक? मतलब what is this? 6 years? He's such a coward. Should have gone to Islamabad. झंडा वही गाड़ेंगे, right?
Mhm.
And we're like, ईरान को क्यों छोड़ दिया? अखंड भारत तो ईरान तक जाता है. Why aren't we attacking Iran? What is going on? Why is America attacking Iran? Like, why aren't we the ones doing it, right? And I've taken it to like crazy extremes where I'm like, if you want a Hindu Rashtra, then women shouldn't work. Golwalkar said women shouldn't work.
Mhm.
So yeah, women shouldn't work. So all the people in this group, really, like, all the husbands should stop their women from going out and working, and all the women should just serve the husbands. That is what they should do, and stop sending your daughters to school anymore, because obviously, what's the point? It's a Hindu Rashtra in the future. And Golwalkar has said so many things, Savarkar has said so many things. Even like in 2013, Mohan Bhagwat had said the same thing, that, oh, a woman's job is to manage the domestic affairs and a man's job is to go out and work. So yeah, that is what Hindu Rashtra is. So I've started to basically do that, and then what I'm seeing is it makes them extremely uncomfortable when you start questioning their own personal, like. So I was not realizing that they were doing the same to me, but I couldn't do it to them. Like they were questioning my own beliefs, they were questioning me for standing with or standing by my beliefs of being anti-establishment, or you know questioning my work or like whatever. But I was not doing the same to them because I didn't know how to. But now I have started doing the same as well, where I'm questioning their personal lives, where I'm questioning their beliefs, right? And I'm saying that, fuck you, man. You do it to me, so I do it back to you now.
But it must have, I don't know, because you do like, first of all, you do some great reporting as part
Hmm.
of News Laundry, and your
Yeah.
contribution, the whole podcast series was amazing.
Thank you.
But when such an effort goes into creating something,
Hmm.
and I'm sure this has happened where someone who's really close to you, family friend, would
Hmm.
just not even care to read it and call it fake news as soon as you put it out there.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
Does it? I mean, it must feel bad. And I'm asking this because I have, of course, I'm not working on political happenings at your level,
Hmm.
but
Hmm.
I also come from a family of Sanghis,
Hmm.
and I have literally done what you've done. Before, like ultra Sanghi part, I've
Hmm.
just closed off all contacts with them, but
Hmm.
it
Hmm.
still does affect me, the fact that they are so different than how I am. So
Yeah.
how does it feel when the objectivity of your own work is questioned?
Yeah, so that happens on a regular basis actually. Now my tweets
Mhm.
also are shared in like groups, like screenshots, everything, and they're like recently actually last week, my mom called me and said that some people in the family were told by someone in Bombay that they read my tweets and they told me to shut up. So I mean, it's a really weird thing, and I keep getting like stuff like this. Like relatives keep telling my mom, "Ki, "Arey, why is he talking against Modi? Why is he putting his own life in danger and shit like that?" Like whatever.
So
Um,
interesting. Go on. Sorry.
Hmm. No, but I mean, that is there. And then the other aspect is, of course, that whenever I do some work, they would share it saying, oh, this guy is so biased against the Modi government or whatever. Can't believe that he's done something like this. Like the WhatsApp report recently we did,
Yeah.
where we pointed out, we found like 10 admins from the ABVP. So we spent like a good, like we literally were up all night working really hard to find out what is going on. We were calling them and taking their, comments as well. I mean, we were not like naam dal denge or ho jayega types. We were like, nee, they should have their side as well. We should call them and take their comments as well. Otherwise, it's like not a good journalistic exercise. Um, but these nuances are lost on people nowadays, right? These nuances are absolutely lost. And I realized that whenever my work gets questioned, I used to feel really bad. But now I'm like, no, but there are good people who are listening to this or reading this. There are sensible people who are being helped with this. I get so many calls from aspiring UPSC students and DMs that your work really helps us understand what is going on and etc. So I'm happy with that. I'm doing things for people like that. I'm not doing things for people like even my family who already has an established bias. So whatever I write will be basically seen with that lens.
Just to add to that, so have there been any instances where you yourself evidently said that your ideology is overall evolved, right, from 10 years
Hmm.
back?
Hmm.
So forget about all the radically converted radical bhakts or whatever,
Hmm.
for
Hmm.
a lack of a better term.
Hmm.
So has there been any case where someone whose opinions have changed and has admitted it to you
Yeah, my
through themselves
parents
in fact?
actually.
Okay.
Yeah, my own parents actually, because my dad used to be very conservative and very
Mm,
RSS supporting and whatever.
mm,
And also like one of my like uncles etc. was also like that. But through conversations and personally talking to them and many fights as well.
mm,
Now my dad sees sense in it. Earlier, it's like earlier he would tell me not to say things against Modi or BJP, whatever, personally.
Hmm.
Then later he went silent. Like, I knew that he was still considering what I do and considering my views, etc. And now when he sees that, when he's like basically also become like more of a Ravish Kumar watcher than a Times Now watcher. Let's put it that way.
Nice.
Yes, so he's like, I don't like this noise anymore. I'm watching Ravish Kumar every day. So now he basically has started defending me, and which is very nice for me that my own dad comes out in defense whenever someone says something against me, right? And then now one of my uncles is also coming to my defense, saying that no, he has worked in this area, so he knows more than you, so shut the fuck up, basically. And like, which is also heartening to see, where there are people who are now starting to speak up in my own family as well, which didn't happen earlier.
As a larger point to this exact thing,
Hmm.
especially in the last 2 3 months with the CA and RC protest and
Hmm.
whatever is happening in Shaheen Bagh and then recently in JNU, it
Hmm.
has, for someone like me who lives so far and was
Hmm.
almost starting to believe that there is no force that could challenge the current regime. It's almost heartening to see the kind of protests that are happening and are happening across the country, even in small towns.
Right.
So, do you feel like, how do you look at these protests? How do you see them evolving? How do you see them in the larger narrative of the Modi era?
Yeah, so the thing is that, yeah, I agree where you say that it's heartening to see that young people are coming out and protesting, because this law is absolutely shitty. It's actually
Of course.
sinister, and it's scary how this whole thing is playing out, like from the government side. It seems like people are just there are like two people who are running this country who are absolutely drunk on power, who are just doing whatever the fuck they want, because they're not listening anymore. And it's heartening to see that people coming out on the streets and protesting, and making sure that they don't have it easy, right? Which is important.
Yeah.
From a larger context, what I think is happening is, people are coming out and saying enough is enough. Till now, there was a giant silent amount of people who were not saying things because they thought that they don't have any alternatives. They, like, if there is no BJP, what else is there, right? But I used to always tell people who asked me this, ki, if not BJP, then who? राहुल गांधी को वोट देंगे. So I'm like, no,
Hmm.
if not BJP, then it's you. You are the opposition. Like, you literally, you can go
Yeah.
on Facebook and start questioning the BJP, and then you become the opposition. What the fuck does if not BJP then who mean? Right? I mean, you are a sensible citizen of this country. You can question them whenever they want, and therefore you are the opposition. So, like, I mean, it's such a simple thing to say, but now I think people are realizing this, where they know that they have a voice, they have the power to influence, they have sense enough to come out and say things, because what is happening is not right, and they have to come out and say what is happening is not right, right? And I think that is one trigger that has happened. We still have 4 years of this government to go, so
Yeah.
many more battles coming.
So how do you see this specific moment going into the future? Like, क्या होने वाला है ये आगे जाके क्या होने वाला है इस चीज का,
One
अगले
of
6 महीने,
my
1 साल, 2 साल?
one of my bosses had told me that people in politics, the faster they rise, the faster they fall. So I think the most that Modi could have gained from any election was in 2019. That was his literal peak point, right? From here, it is going to go downhill, right? Just that we have to see how fast it happens, and it is going to cause like a massive amount of collateral damage, right? Because
Yeah.
and it is already happening. You can see it playing out, where the collateral damage that will happen is going to be on the people who don't have the privilege, right? It's not going to happen to you, me, I mean, the three of us here. It's going to happen to the less privileged people. It's going to happen to vulnerable people. It's going to happen to people who are in the margins of society. But I mean, that is what we have to do now. Basically, as sensible citizens, we have to keep highlighting the margins of the society who are suffering because of this, not us, not the privileged people, just the people who are suffering. We have to keep highlighting it and standing by them.
Which often gets difficult when something like Deepika coming into JNU happens, and then that
Yeah,
becomes all of the news.
yeah.
Um, so, I, so I guess as a news professional, how, because there is one aspect where there, for news laundry, for example, there is
Mm,
one aspect of clicks and how many people read this, and then
mm,
there is other aspect as a news professional, that you want to put something out there which you think is important,
right.
right? So how do you, again, how do you manage the both of them? And I guess it's a bit easier at news laundry because they are more of a supportive organization. But
Mm, mm,
imagine if you were in, say, India today,
mm,
like,
mm.
how does a journalist deal with that conflict?
So
Bec-
I think the one thing good about News Laundry versus say in India today. So with News Laundry, the thing is, I think right now at this point of time, News Laundry might be the least censored platforms in India.
yeah,
Right, one of the least censored platforms, because I mean, all said and done, News Laundry respects people's personal opinion. So if whatever the fuck I tweet, as long as I'm not insulting or just directly affecting the reputation of the organization, they're cool with whatever I say. you know and they let me choose my stories, they let me choose what I want to write about, and of course they keep advising me on things I can do as well. But largely they leave me on my own, right? mm,
mhm,
with this something like India today, the thing is that News Laundry can do this because again it's a subscription funded model. So we don't
yeah,
really have to care about clicks. We have to care about people who will pay. Right? If we want
yeah.
audiences, we want traffic that will pay for our journalism. So that's a
There is no
completely
boycott.
different approach.
There is no hashtag boycott news laundry that is going
No,
to happen because of
no,
that.
absolutely, exactly. And the thing is that even if, like, say, for instance, as compared to India today, who say a crore people watch it, if a lakh people read my stories, and out of that 10% are willing to pay for the news that I'm doing, I'm happy with it. That's the whole point. With India today, though, they will always be hungry for eyeballs and clicks because their revenue comes from there. So they will always follow something like a Deepika Padukone story because obviously
Yeah.
people will watch it. They will always follow conflict wherever it's happening, right? Like Balakot happens, of course they'll cover it more. Riots happen, of course they'll cover it more because people will watch it more, right? They will never cover something like, a farmers' protest because they know farmers are not watching India today, right? So they know
Yeah,
that.
I mean, and you
Um,
have to consider yourself lucky.
Yeah, absolutely. I do consider
Sorry, go on.
myself
Sorry.
very lucky. No, no, absolutely. You're right. I mean, I do consider
No,
myself lucky.
but no, lucky in the sense that you are not in Ashtak and you don't have to wear socks as gloves in your hand when the moon lander is going to land on moon.
Yeah,
You know. So
absolutely. And it's very like I'm actually I consider this fortunate, like for myself as well, that the first sort of one of the first major platforms I started writing for was News Laundry, right? Because the way they picked me up was also very weird. I was very active on Reddit, and I used to do like these last week in Parliament roundups on
I
Reddit.
remember those threads on our India, Kumbhkarn,
Right.
right?
Yeah, Kumbhakarna. Yeah.
I don't know if
Yes.
I was supposed to say this.
No, it's fine. Like I've already been doxxed like multiple years ago.
That's how
Um,
I know that you were, because you did an helped in an AMA for Tathagat Satpathy, right?
Tathagat. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
exactly.
yeah.
So I was working with him, so that's why. But
Hmm.
anyway, so they saw it, like someone in News Laundry, I think Dipanjana or someone saw it,
Hmm.
and she was like, "Oh, hey, do you want to turn this into a column?" I'm like, "Why not? Will you pay?" I was like, "Yeah, of course." So then I started writing for them, and then since then, like I've been doing more stories for them, and then my one of my reports that I did in 2017, or it was on the finance bill. that went bonkers, right? Like in a I covered because I was in Parliament. I was giving like a blow by blow account of how the finance bill is being passed.
Remember that? Yeah.
So that went viral. People went bonkers, and so that is when I pitched Constitution to Abhinandan, and Abhinandan was like, "Hey, yes, of course, you have potential, so why not?" So then Constitution came about. And I was also writing for BuzzFeed, I was writing for Huffington Post, I was writing for Daily O. So all of these were like in my capacity of columnist. But with News Laundry, it was always a special relationship because I have been a subscriber since like 2014, 13.
Wow.
Yeah, because I used like my first time I could pay, I paid them. I was like, this is literally the future of journalism, and this is what I want to do. Um, and I
That is very
guess,
true.
yeah, and that is, I guess, the universe just aligned in a way that I wanted it to.
So, you're almost like I look at you as a new age journalist, right? Because
Hmm.
if you see, like, read some of our older, much celebrated journalists,
Hmm.
I feel that they thrive in complications. What I'm trying to
Yeah.
say is that something that I've always admired about you is that you
Hmm.
try to make it as simple, as nuggets as you could.
Yeah.
Having said that, at least I felt that the whole electoral bonds story did
Hmm.
not gain as much traction as it should have, as
Yeah.
because it's hugely important and it's hugely terrifying.
Hmm.
So my question is, do you now in hindsight feel that you could have done it a bit any way differently? And also, what goes in your training yourself
Hmm.
as a journalist, especially when you are not like from the exact journalistic background
Yeah.
as a lot of people are, right? So yeah, two
Right.
questions, I guess. Yeah.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
one thing that I'm always, and I always like evangelize sort of, is whoever, like, even like younger journalists, when they come to me and say, "Yo, please tell us, give us some advice." I tell them, the first thing you have to do is fucking simplify your language.
Yeah.
You're reaching out to an audience which has ADHD now across the world.
Mm.
You
Yeah.
have to basically, for a fact, looking at stats, that people don't read any story beyond a minute and a half anymore, right? But people who read long form will read long form only if you keep them on the website and you write in a way that they're engaged, right? So I mean, unfortunately, that is the way the world is going, and you have to figure that out.
With that, do we run the risk of losing out on the nuances? Because as opposed to say a fake news kind of a
Hmm.
narrative,
Hmm.
fact-based narrative often lies, a lot of it lies in the nuances, right? So does it make your job much harder that way?
I'll tell you how, like, I've learned a trick to do that, right? And I think that also comes with a speech writing training, because I was writing speeches. What I used to do, my day-to-day job from 2011 onwards till when I was working with MPs, was
Mhm.
reading ultra complicated things, reports
Mhm.
and laws and whatever, simplifying it and then feeding it to my MP, like literally
Mhm.
on an
Okay.
hour to hour basis. Like they would give me an issue, I have to read it, and then 3 hours later I have to brief them, right? Which
Mhm.
goes into their speech, right? So,
Mhm.
and I would also form them processing the whole thing, and then simplifying it and boiling it down to an extent where their audiences will understand it, right? They will tell it using stories, they will use analogies, they will use different examples from their own life, and I
Mhm.
think that that works wonders. So I realized this can be done in journalism too, right? Like for instance, like when I had to explain Article 14 and 15,
Yeah.
Mhm.
and how the CAA is breaking it. I could have done what, say, lawyers or policy experts do, where they are explaining 14 and 15, what it is, explaining judgments, etc., whatever.
Mhm.
But I thought, no, the best way to explain it is through football. Like
Yeah.
you're playing a game of football, and the rules are basically the constitution. And I was explaining it in very simple way, where I assumed automatically that my audience doesn't even know how relevant the constitution is. I start
Mhm.
from that point and then go towards and build it up till 14, 15. And I do this very often where I do not assume anything about my audience. I assume that every person who is reading my story is like that Meghnad from 2011 who does not know shit, like who just was dropped into this on this website or wherever and is like now trying to figure out what the fuck is going on, right? And that is practically 90% of the people in the country right now. 99% of the people in the country right now. Um so yeah, that is, I think that is what, when you say new age journalist, I think that is what a lot of journalists who are engaging or who are writing or who have figured this out or cracked this code are able to do, where they're able to engage the audience, they're able to talk to them in their language, and also they do not have any preconceived notions about what sort of education they come from, what sort of understanding they have, because they always start from basics.
For the electoral bonds,
Yeah.
the whole story piece,
Um,
would you have?
yeah, I think, electoral bonds, it often happens that with something like electoral bonds, for instance, the issue is so complicated. It's so difficult to explain, and
Yeah.
there are so many layers and layers of complications and thus implications of it. You can only simplify it to a certain extent, right? For instance, I did this explaining electoral bonds video for New Zealand. There's like NL cheat sheet. Then we did another episode on political funding for Constitution season 2. I realized that we did our best. We simplified it as much as we could, but still, I find it that people are not able to relate to it. People
Yeah.
do not understand the fact that political parties are also entities that require money to run. Even that point is not really registered yet. So, like, you have to understand that, like, just ask any common person on the street what a political party is for them. They will immediately start naming leaders of that
Yeah.
party. Like if you ask what is the BJP, they ha Modi ji, Modi ji BJP. They will never say, oh, it's a political party, which is an organization, which is supposed to come to power and like choose leaders to represent us, and therefore we are voting for them. None of that, right? They will just answer with Modi ji. If you ask what is Shiv Sena, they'll say, huh, Bal Thackeray, Uddhav Thackeray, Aditya Thackeray, whatever. If you ask what is NCP, Sharad Pawar, of course, right? I mean, and then think about it that way, right? The first thing that does not, like, for me, if you ask me what is a political party, I would say it's an organization that is run to represent people, right?
Yeah.
And to do that, they need money. It's a whole structure. It's a whole business in a way. It's a whole mechanism that works, which churns out leaders, and then people can either vote for them or not vote for them, right? But that sort of, I think, understanding or evolution hasn't happened. That political thought still hasn't seeped into our society yet,
I
because we still, in a lot of ways, think like slaves.
exactly. I was trying to put it in a little different. I was like, we still look at them as Raja and ourselves as Praja.
Absolutely, absolutely. Like
But
we
no,
have
go on,
been
sorry.
taught since a very young age to respect authorities. Whenever you
Exactly.
ask questions to your parents, they are like, "Arey, nahi, respect your elders." When you ask it to teachers, they have no answers. They'll just put you out and make you stand in the sun because they have no answers. But they will never admit it. Respect your authorities, and then authorities change. It becomes your boss. It becomes your political leader. It's parents, elders. You just look everywhere. Everybody wants to be an authority and not questioned, right? And that permeates in our political system. It's just a reflection of what we want.
And that is precisely why, up until now, I felt that any sort of protest, like large scale protest, is impossible in India because we respect authority too much to do that. And I have often thought of it. In fact, we recently did an episode on why most engineered techie guys seem to be right leaning in India when it is the opposite in the West.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
I cannot help but link it to our caste structures as well,
Hmm.
because caste
Hmm.
is a predefined structure where you know that there are certain authorities that you just out and out respect as
Yeah,
a group. So
absolutely.
I'll just like to correct you on one thing that you said.
Hmm.
When people say Shiv Sena,
Hmm.
it's the wokest party of India.
It's the
Wokest party of India.
oh yeah,
Woke
currently
max.
definitely. Yeah, yeah. My God, dude, like the it's blowing my mind. Uddhav Thackeray coming out and saying, "Of course, that girl can say free Kashmir." I was like, "Wait, what is going on? Which world
Sanjay
am I
Raut,
living in?"
Sanjay Raut in the Samna has written this on record that
Imagine Samna. Imagine that.
Yeah, I'm blown away. I'm just blown
I
away.
I would have even been okay with something like this having been said in the assembly, but this coming out in Samna
Yeah,
is
exactly.
So yesterday, Uddhav Thackeray said that people who are opposing Deepika show Talibani mindset. I was like,
mindset.
Oh yeah,
yo,
yeah,
claps.
yeah. I mean,
But
it's stunning. The Shiv Sena's transformation that I'm seeing is very stunning,
so,
and I think
so
this
it's
is Aditya Thackeray coming out in them.
but it's very surprising. Like I honestly don't know the like how is this happening, the route to it, because they can still very well be quiet and not say anything at all.
Hmm.
But it's amazing that this is happening. So we were talking. Um, we have been talking about objectivity
Hmm.
as journalists,
Yeah.
and trying to put it out there. So in the last few years, I mean, you obviously have a political understanding of
Hmm.
who Meghnad is, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
And then you has there been any news piece that you had to write about or talk about that you knew that your objective e- politics was completely different to it, and yet you have had to talk about it? Also, has there
Hmm.
been any piece that was really difficult to do, either because the emotional element in it was like something that you just was difficult to handle, like?
Reservations. So when I did the episode on reservations
Mhm.
for Constitution,
Yeah.
it was like a very big struggle for me. Like every
Mm.
episode, we were spending around 2 weeks to write, 1 week to shoot, and 1 week to edit as well. So like a month's work went into each episode, right?
Wow.
And I mean that it was incredible, but with reservations, we took 3 months. Like literally, like every day. That first, though, I was resisting the idea that we should do an episode on reservations at all, right? I was like, no, I can't be the person who is saying these things. I can't be the upper caste Brahmin who is like schooling
Yeah,
people on
yeah.
reservation.
And who was your guest on that episode? I forgot. Sorry.
No, no, we didn't take any guest. We basically
Okay.
scrapped the homework review after that. Like, I mean, we were like just not
Hmm.
not really ready
Makes
to
sense.
deal with it. But the thing is that it was such a struggle for me because, like, I have grown up in a Brahmin family. My whole family is very, again, Sanghi but privileged, etc. And very Brahmin, like as Brahmin as it gets. Um, and I have grown up with this whole, you know, casteism that has seeped in me, that we are superior, we are doing this, we deserve certain things, reservations are bad, etc. To get out of that mindset, to get out of that and make sense of it, first is I read Annihilation of Caste. I
Brilliant.
read like a bunch of stuff. I read Constituent Assembly debates. I
Mm.
did a lot of research on reservations after that, like in SC/ST Atrocities Act, all of that I did. And then, but internally it was still a struggle. Like I was reading all this, but it took time to process as well. And I used to have discussions with a lot of people on a daily basis to sort of get this whole, the mindset out of me, right?
Mhm.
And yeah, I think to a certain extent I've succeeded, but the struggle continues.
You bring me to a great point, which I had no idea I would ask you about. But
Mhm.
before 2011,
Mhm.
um, I, I feel that for people from the upper caste, it's
Hmm.
almost caste is almost invisible. It is
Hmm.
only made visible when for the first time when you are going to take that entrance exam and you know that
Absolutely.
a group of people. So now, when you look back on that time, do you find any moments where there was caste right in front of you and you just were completely desensitized to it?
Absolutely. Like things like not sharing the same glasses of what, like to have water with our
Yeah.
servants, like with like our domestic help, or always, like keeping away, like even like looking down upon domestic help, like for instance, right? And like, treating them differently or treating them as if they're inferior to me or like the whole family, or even, and that is very existing, and like this for a fact that that exists in a lot of upper caste families in India
Most,
still.
most.
Most upper caste families in the India still, and it was right in front of me, right? It was happening on a day to day basis, literally. But it took me like coming to Delhi and then being
Mhm.
schooled on Twitter to actually make me realize that what I was thinking was wrong.
I
And I mean,
mean,
it.
this happened to me after I moved to the States. This realization happened way after I moved to States, and when I look back at my younger
Hmm.
days, I
Hmm.
realized that so much was just invisible when it was right in front of you. But
Absolutely.
I guess it's all and this kind of ties back to the first thing that we started to talk about, and that if we start calling out people for the fact that they were not woke enough 10 years ago, then how will
Hmm.
we ever be united against any repression, any oppression?
I think, at the end of the day, people will respond to basic human values. When you have like a ideological existential fight going on, right? So right now you have to understand the protests are happening because this is an existential fight for a lot of people,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
Like this is literally making them question everything about what is going, like basically this country, the idea of India, or their citizenship, or whether they'll have a job tomorrow, whether they'll have a place to live tomorrow, whether their kids will be safe. It's an existential question for a lot of people, right? So
hmm,
when these protests, you have to understand this nature of this protest is existential in nature. But when you look at something like the anti-corruption movement, right, which happened, it was not
yeah,
an existential protest. It was not people coming out and saying that, oh, like India as a idea does not exist. They were saying that no, India as an idea needs to improve, and the one
yeah.
way to do it is to get rid of corruption, right? That was one of the things about the protest. So when you start connecting over basic human values, but also positive basic human values like empathy, or even individuality or freedom or liberty, these basic values, when they become like the rallying call for a protest, I feel like those protests are extremely impactful in the long run. But what I'm seeing right now is an existential type of protest. So basically, they're just fighting for the right to life right now. Like if you look at it that way, right?
Yeah.
And it's like, once we get over this hurdle as a population, as a collective, that is when we start also talking about what comes after this, right? What is the new sort of idea of modern India that we want to see? Because clearly right now, this government is just wanting to erase a lot of ideas and beliefs that we had earlier, right? They just want to like wipe the slate clean and write over it. But then ultimately they will go out of power at some point. They're not going to stay
Fingers
there
crossed.
forever. No,
Fingers
but they will.
crossed.
Like, I mean, if not, BJP, but Modi and Shah will sort of at some point go away. It's not like they'll just be there for 100 more years.
अरे
But then
अरे वो
after they
मशरूम,
go,
आपको क्या पता उन मशरूम्स के बारे में?
ओ यहाँ सही है, मतलब
सॉरी सॉरी मैं फालतू।
मतलब 2014 से तो चेहरे चेंज ही नहीं हुए, मैं तो कभी देखा ही
हम लोग
नहीं।
ग्लो की बात, when we were waiting for you to come on, we were talking about the glow, literal glow that is coming out of his face every day.
Yeah, yeah.
But
बहुत
yeah,
एफर्ट
someday.
डालते हैं बॉस, उसमें बहुत एफर्ट डालते हैं clearly.
It's
But
all part of PR.
yeah, it is, it is. But the whole point is that, after a point you have to realize that there will be a change. There will be new people coming up. There will be new leaders coming up. But then when the new leaders coming up, it's what is interesting to find out is what they stand for, and what is it that people are willing to back, the basic human values, the basic constitutional rights, that the basic spirit of the constitution that we have, are they willing to uphold it? Are people willing to back it? That's I think the question for our generation now.
Which is also the saddest part, right? So we have gone from aspirational struggle to an existential struggle now.
It is.
In
It is sad, but also I think this churn that is happening will also throw up some good things, as all churns do. Just that I hope that we don't fucking go to a genocide level of churning.
The signs seem to be there.
Yeah.
Um,
I mean, we have to keep talking about the possibilities of genocide because it seems like it is heading there. I really hope it doesn't happen. But, that's the thing. It's a real fear right now.
However, to the both of you, actually, if you look at the IAC protests in 2011 and this protest, there is one thing that is also something, I mean, at least I see, is that
Mm.
the anti-corruption protest, I cannot help but look at it at a caste angle as well, because uh, the aspirational protests were largely upper caste driven. The existential protests are largely driven by the minorities and the people not from the upper caste.
Mm.
And however sad it might look, but I also cannot help but think that in the last 8-10 years, something that has fundamentally changed is that people like you, me, are talking about Ambedkar, are talking about these things which have always been there and have been very real, but are
Mm.
talking of them in much more like solid sense. And I think that those group of people are finally finding their utterances. So I mean, you can look at it as Aditya said, as like from aspirational to existential, but I also look at it as finally like a group starting to get their voices back. Perhaps that's the silver lining that I could think of.
Absolutely. And what we also have to understand is that people like us who have been I think I keep telling people that we are one of the first generations. Like, I'm guessing you guys are also millennials.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah, very
we
much
are
so.
I think the first generation who has seen two things. One is we have seen the days before the internet and after,
Yeah.
right? Like, we have seen literally the evolution of computers as we know it and internet as we know it. We are the last generation which saw a internet-less world. That is important. And the other thing that I think we saw as a generation of Indians specifically is that we are the first generation which was far removed from the independence struggle. Right? Like, for instance, my grandparents had personal stories from independence and
Yeah.
what happened then. My parents had heard personal stories firsthand from their parents, right? We are hearing it secondhand, right? So we don't relate to them anymore that much. We have over a period of 2-3 generations, we have come to a stage, our generation has come to a stage where we are comfortable, and those ghosts of the past independence struggle have become like history books, and they're taught in school. वो रट्टा मार के बस एग्जाम में उल्टी करना पड़ता है, and
Yeah.
that's it. We don't relate to it anymore. So those baggages, those ghosts, right? Those are not there anymore. This is the same thing that is happening in Germany, by the way, where the neo-Nazi and everything is coming up
Yeah.
because the new generation does not relate to what happened in World War II. So they don't give a fuck, basically, right? So,
It is so interesting. That you bring this point. It's so interesting because so in Germany, obviously, you cannot use any Nazi
hmm,
signs or memorabilia. So
hmm,
the neo Nazis in Germany are using the American Confederate flags to signal
hmm.
to others of their neo-Nazism, and this is also happening not just in Germany but in countries like Australia as well, which
Right,
is
right.
uh, and I think something to look at in India is that you are right that most of us have heard secondhand stories, but then
Hmm.
why still, like, there is obviously a now very visible but always latent Islamophobia that has
Hmm.
existed in India.
Yeah, yeah,
And
absolutely.
it's not like that generations have changed and that has died down, because we have never really been confronted with any animosity in general, and yet it seems like the hate has not really reduced.
No, no, no. It has actually come to the fore. It was always
Yeah,
there. I knew it was always there in my family. Just that I thought that they would never come to a stage where they would be talking about this publicly and proudly, which is the
yeah,
bizarre part, right? Like that bigotry was there, latent bigotry was there. But I never thought it would come to a point where in front of like 100 people or in a group or whatever, they would just say, ha ha, maar do, kaat do. These
yeah,
people should be
exactly.
kicked out or whatever. And that is scary for me. I mean, that is something that is shocking. That is something that I did not expect, because I genuinely assumed that we are a decent society till now. But clearly I was wrong. And yeah,
So I had a rant about this a day or two before.
right.
So we had last week this Rajdeep Sardesai hosted debate, right? So-called
Hmm.
debate between Kanhaiya Kumar and that absolute loony from BJP
Hmm.
on the other.
Amitabh Sinha.
So Amitabh Sinha. So
Yeah.
what struck me strongly was the fact that you can now have spokespeople of a national party being uncomfortable with condemning someone like a Mussolini or a Hitler on national TV, and that is like just another day in our nation.
Right, absolutely, it
So
It's
is.
not a big news. Yeah, that's
No.
it's
something that is surprising.
not a big news, and this is not something like, even in case of not condemning Godse, I still granted to them that that could be that could be an electoral necessity for them. But
Hmm.
what is the vote bank when it comes to Hitler or Mussolini, right? So if you are not being able to condemn them, it means that you are so deep rooted in that ideology in some sense.
Right, and it's really weird. I saw that interview. I saw that whole show as well.
Drama.
Acha, yeah. So I also saw that show, and it was really funny as well. How Kanaya was handling it and how everything was going on, because it was pure entertainment, right? Nobody was taking anything seriously in that show, except for like a few people who were also, like the students who were like there. But or I guess Rajdeep Sardesai was the only one who was taking it seriously. But other than that, I saw that nobody else was. Everybody was just like, ah, lol, maza aa raha hai.
थोड़ा
Lol,
सा
dekh rahe kya ho raha hai.
थोड़ा सा स्कैरी तो है, नो डाउट. अच्छा, आई मीन आई नो इट्स वेरी लेट देयर, सो
Hmm.
I we are almost like done with all the questions. I have one
Yeah,
question which is kind of light question. I don't know.
right.
So if you're ever invited to a Republic TV debate,
Hmm.
will you go?
I've already been invited multiple times and I did not go. I actually was stopped by my wife from going. I was like, "अरे जाके देखते हैं क्या होता है, मजा आएगा." But she was like, "No, you're not going. I'm going to divorce you."
So with that, I think we've had real fun talking to
Yeah.
you. And as I said, Garibo Ka Hafta hai, you're always welcome anytime that you want to. And just like Garibo Ka Hafta, anything interesting that you read, saw recently that you'd want us and our listeners to
Oh, I
know
just
about?
finished watching The Two Popes on Netflix.
Yeah.
It's such a lovely movie, guys. I mean, you should definitely watch it, because the acting is brilliant, but it also shows how someone like the Pope, who is like such a powerful man who controls, like who has power over like 1.2 billion people. It just shows their vulnerability so well, about their existential questions about how a Pope, it's like, I can't resign. How is this a thing? I can't resign. Why is this being forced on me? Like, it's clear that I have failed my duty to, but then why aren't you letting me resign? So it's really good. I mean, I really enjoyed it. So please do watch that. And the other thing that I've been recommending to everyone is this documentary on Netflix called "Don't Fuck with Cats."
Yeah,
Um,
yeah, watched it.
yeah.
Yeah, it was really fascinating, especially because I myself am a huge cat lover. So
Yeah, exactly. I mean that I'm doing, and I'm still getting through Edward Snowden's biography, like autobiography. It's a permanent record, and I'm enjoying it. So I think that is one more recommendation.
thank you so much, Abhinandan. मेघनाथ, सी मेरे
Abhinandan,
दिमाग में अभिनंदन, वो टाइम्स नाउ के डिबेट के बाद से मेरे दिमाग में अभिनंदन आ गया वैसे.
okay.
थैंक यू सो
Promotion.
मच, अभिनंदन स्टैंड इन.
Yeah. Wow. Thanks.
No, no, no.
गरीबों का
Meghnath,
हफ्ता तो गरीबों का अभिनंदन.
Meghnath,
गरीबों का
you are in. I keep mentioning in that WhatsApp
Yeah.
group that you should take over ANA at the least, because I just feel that those two are just getting a bit old for these things. They
No,
often
actually,
end up.
I like the fact that they do ANA, because if you look at it that way, that is what adds the charm to the podcast. Because it's just both of them talking about new age pop culture. I highly enjoy it because their views
Sometimes,
are so dated. I was like, I'm so amused by the whole thing. So people get outraged by it. I get
yeah,
extremely amused by it. Like, I'm like, yeah, that's actually like really funny. It's like,
sometimes they will say some things that will I listen and I like something inside me cringes a little.
yeah. Absolutely. Maybe that's the great thing about that podcast, that it makes you cringe. Look
Yeah.
at
The
it that way.
the Michael Scott of podcast.
Yeah.
Anyway,
Yeah. That's actually a great analogy.
thanks so much, Meghna. Thanks. It was really fun talking to you. I hope you had fun too.